Trust is a delicate thing, and I didn't realize just how fragile it was until I saw her name light up his phone. It was just an ordinary evening, or at least it should have been. My husband had come home late, said he was exhausted from work, and barely looked up from his phone while eating dinner. He'd been distracted lately, but I thought maybe it was stress, nothing out of the ordinary. He excused himself and headed for the shower, leaving his phone on the table. I don't know what made me look, but something inside me just needed to check. I glanced over, feeling ridiculous, but then his phone lit up. A message popped up on the screen and everything in me froze. The name was one I didn't recognize, and the message was worse. "Hey babe, thinking of you." 3 simple words that felt like a punch to the gut. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath catching as I read it again, unable to believe my eyes. "Hey babe, thinking of you." I tried to tell myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was a spam message, or maybe it wasn't what it seemed. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't innocent. No one calls someone babe by accident, not unless there's something going on. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. I felt my hands start to shake as the reality hit me. This was my husband, the man I trusted with everything. And now, in just a few seconds, that trust had been shattered. I wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but the words were burned into my mind. He was in the next room, the water running in the shower, completely unaware of the bombshell he'd left on the table. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, betrayal, sadness. All I knew was that something had broken in me, something I might never get back. The doubts, the suspicion, the lies I'd never imagined. All of it was right there, staring me in the face. And I knew this was just the beginning of a truth I wasn't ready to face. They say that every love story has its highs and lows, but ours felt different. When we met, it was like something clicked instantly. We were both young and full of plans, dreams we hadn't even realized were possible yet. He was charming, confident, and made me feel like the center of his world. I'd never felt so sure of anyone in my life. I remember how he'd look at me, really look at me, like he was studying every part of who I was. We spent hours talking about anything and everything, our childhoods, our fears, the dreams we'd once thought were too big to share. He made me feel understood, valued, and loved in a way that made me think, this is it. This is the person I've been waiting for. We got married not long after we met. It felt fast. But love has a way of sweeping you up, making you believe that as long as you have each other, nothing can break you. We built our lives together, filled with small rituals that made each day feel complete. Sunday mornings with coffee on the patio, late night talks when we'd stay up laughing over the silliest things, or those quiet evenings just watching a movie. Those were the moments that made our life feel solid. But looking back, I can see the tiny signs that maybe I missed. Maybe I chose to ignore them. A part of me wonders if I was just too blinded by love to notice the way he'd change his phone password without saying a word. Or the way he'd step out to take calls that he'd brushed off as work emergencies. It's funny how you can live with someone every day and yet not see the little things adding up. The trust we had was something I cherished. I never felt the need to question him, to doubt his loyalty. In fact, I prided myself on being the kind of wife who didn't pry, who respected his space. I thought that was what love was, trusting someone fully, without needing to question their every move. And for a long time, I thought he felt the same. But then, he started coming home later than usual. He'd give quick, vague explanations about late meetings or extra projects that needed his attention. At first, I didn't think much of it. Work gets busy, I know that. I wanted to believe he was just going through a stressful period, that it was nothing personal. But there was something about the way he'd avoid my gaze or change the subject whenever I asked about his day. I shrugged it off, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. He had never given me a reason to doubt him. But then, there were the other changes, the ones that were hard to ignore. He'd become more distant, less present, even when we were together. The small gestures, the affectionate looks that once came so naturally, started to feel forced, like he was going through the motions without really being there. One night, he was scrolling through his phone, and I noticed the way he angled it, just slightly, so that I couldn't see the screen. It was a small action, something I could have easily dismissed, but it made my heart sink. I wanted to ask him about it, to confront him right then and there, but I didn't. I didn't want to be the jealous wife, the one who questioned his every move. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just reading too much into things. But as the days went by, that small doubt grew. I began to notice other things too. How he'd smile at his phone, typing away with a focus I hadn't seen in a while. I asked him once who he was talking to, and he gave a quick, just a friend from work, before putting his phone down. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, that wanted to take his words at face value. But the doubt was there, a quiet nagging feeling that I couldn't shake. I started to question myself, wondering if I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't doing enough, maybe I wasn't the wife he needed. It's strange how quickly you can turn on yourself. How easy it is to believe that you're the one who's lacking, that if only you'd done things differently, he'd still look at you the way he used to. But then I'd remember the life we'd built, the years we'd spent growing together, and I'd convince myself that we were just going through a rough patch. Every relationship has its ups and downs, I'd tell myself. And so I pushed down the doubts, trying to hold on to the love we once shared. Yet those doubts kept creeping back. One evening, he left his phone on the table and went outside to take a call. It seemed innocent enough, but the way he hesitated, glancing at his phone before he left, set off alarms in my mind. I wanted to check his phone, to just take a quick peek and put my mind at ease. But I held back, telling myself that I needed to trust him, that looking would only make things worse. But trust isn't something that can survive when doubts start to fester. I could feel the gap between us growing, the warmth that once filled our homes slowly fading. We'd sit together, but it felt like he was a million miles away. The laughter, the late-night talks, the small, tender moments, they were all slipping away, replaced by silence and distance. I remember one weekend, when he had to work late again. He left in a hurry, barely saying goodbye, and as I sat alone, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I thought back to the days when we couldn't stand to be apart, when he'd call me just to say he missed me. And now, it felt like I was the last thing on his mind. Friends started asking if everything was okay. They noticed the changes too. The way he wasn't around as much, the way I'd go out alone more often. I'd put on a brave face, forcing a smile as I assured them that we were fine, that he was just busy with work. But inside, I was crumbling, feeling the weight of the unspoken doubts pressing down on me. As much as I tried to ignore it, to keep our life together from falling apart, I knew that something had shifted. The love I'd believed in, the trust I'd held so tightly to, was slipping through my fingers. I tried to convince myself that things would go back to normal, that this was just a phase, but deep down, I knew. And that night, when I saw her name on his phone, it was like everything I'd been pushing down finally broke through. The doubts, the questions, the moments I tried to ignore, they all came rushing back, confirming what I hadn't wanted to believe. As I stared at his phone, reading those words again and again, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal that I couldn't describe. This was the man I trusted, the man I'd built my life around, and in that moment, I realized that everything I'd held dear might have been a lie. After that night, something inside me changed. Seeing her name on his phone, reading those 3 words that felt like a punch to the chest, it was like the final thread holding my trust together had snapped. I tried to forget, to move on, but the image of that message stayed with me, haunting my thoughts, fueling a suspicion I couldn't ignore. In the days that followed, every interaction with him felt different. I noticed things I hadn't before, small details that now seemed impossible to overlook. The way he would check his phone with a slight smirk, as if reading something that brought him joy. How he'd keep his phone close, almost as if guarding it from me, never leaving it out of his sight. The moments he'd slip away to answer a call, his voice low, cautious. Each action added to my growing sense of unease, a confirmation that something was wrong. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, that maybe I'd misinterpreted everything. But deep down, I knew better. The person I'd shared my life with, the man I trusted unconditionally, was hiding something. And as much as I wanted to hold on to our love, the doubts were stronger, clawing at me, making me feel like a stranger in my own life. One evening, he came home late again, his shirt slightly wrinkled, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering around him. I asked him where he'd been, hoping he'd offer some explanation that would put my mind at ease. But his answer was vague, the kind of excuse that left more questions than answers. Just some work stuff, he'd said, brushing me off, heading straight to the shower without a second glance. As I sat there, staring at the closed bathroom door, the weight of his words hit me. This wasn't the man I'd married, the man who'd once been open and honest with me. He was becoming someone else, someone I didn't recognize, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing him to a secret life I wasn't part of. That night, I lay awake, listening to his steady breathing beside me, feeling the distance between us like a chasm. I wanted to reach out, to pull him close, but the doubts held me back, filling me with a mix of anger and sadness. How could he lie to me, hide things from me, after everything we'd been through? Over the next few days, I found myself growing more desperate for answers. I started paying closer attention to his schedule, his habits, every little detail that might hint at the truth. It felt wrong, invasive, but I was past the point of caring. I needed to know what was going on, to understand why the man I loved was slipping away. One afternoon, I saw my chance. He'd left his phone on the counter while he went to grab something from the car. My heart raced as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. I knew it was a violation of his privacy, that it went against everything I believed in. But in that moment, my need for answers was stronger than my guilt. As I unlocked his phone, I felt a surge of dread. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I'd find something. Scrolling through his messages, my heart sank as I saw her name again, the same woman whose message had sparked my suspicions. I opened the conversation, my eyes scanning the texts, each word feeling like a stab to the heart. "I can't stop thinking about you," she'd written, and his reply, "Same here. Can't wait until our next time." It was all there, laid out in black and white. The secrets, the lies, the betrayal I'd tried so hard to deny. He was meeting her, spending time with her, sharing things with her that he should have been sharing with me. The man I thought I knew was living a double life, and I was just the fool who'd believed in his lies. I put the phone down, feeling numb, my mind reeling from the weight of what I'd just discovered. Part of me wanted to confront him right then, to scream, to demand answers, but another part of me held back, unwilling to let him know I'd seen the truth. I needed more. I needed to understand the full extent of his betrayal before I made any decisions. In the days that followed, I became consumed by my need for answers. I started tracking his movements, watching his every move, searching for any sign that would reveal the extent of his affair. It was a dark, obsessive path, one that took over my life, but I couldn't stop. The more I uncovered, the deeper the wound grew, until I felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies. One evening, I followed him, my heart pounding as I watched him leave the house without saying a word. I stayed back, keeping my distance, feeling like a shadow as I trailed him through the streets. He arrived at a small, dimly lit cafe on the other side of town, a place I'd never been, a place that held no memories for us. As I watched from across the street, I saw her. She was waiting for him, her face lighting up as he walked in. They embraced, a casual, intimate gesture that spoke volumes, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a mix of anger and heartbreak that left me breathless. This was the man I trusted, the man I'd shared my life with, and here he was, sharing pieces of himself with another woman, pieces that should have been mine. I watched them, feeling helpless, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. They laughed, shared whispered words, exchanged looks filled with a familiarity that was once reserved for me. It was like watching a stranger, a version of him I'd never known, and it shattered me in ways I couldn't describe. When he finally came home that night, he acted as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just spent the evening with another woman. He kissed me goodnight, told me he loved me, and I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. His words were hollow, empty, a cruel reminder of the life we'd once shared, a life that was now a lie. In the following weeks, I continued to gather evidence, collecting the pieces of his betrayal until I had a full picture of the life he'd been hiding. The messages, the secret meetings, the lies he told to keep me in the dark, it was all there, a twisted puzzle that I'd finally put together. But with each new piece, I felt myself breaking, losing parts of who I was. I was no longer the woman who trusted, who believed in love and loyalty. I had become someone else, someone consumed by anger and pain, someone who didn't recognize herself anymore. And yet, I couldn't stop. I needed to see this through, to confront him, to make him face the consequences of his actions. One night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. I knew that my life would never be the same, that the love I'd once cherished was gone, replaced by a bitterness that would stay with me forever. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a cycle of pain and deception. I made a decision then, a choice to take control of my life, to confront him and reclaim my dignity. I was done being the victim, done living in the shadows of his lies. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful, and to find a way to move forward, to rebuild the pieces of myself that he tried to break. The night I decided to confront him was one I'll never forget. I had everything laid out, the messages, the receipts, the missed calls. Every lie he'd told, every deception, each piece of his betrayal was right in front of me. I'd spent weeks, maybe even months, piecing it all together, holding on to every scrap of evidence like it was the last bit of control I had over my life. And now I was ready to use it. He came home late, as usual. I sat in the living room, my heart pounding, every nerve on edge, as I waited for him to walk through the door. I'd planned what I would say 1,000 times, rehearsing each word, each accusation, in my head. But as soon as I saw him, standing there with that same casual smile, all my carefully planned words disappeared. All I could feel was the anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak that had been building up inside me for so long. Long night? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. He looked at me, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Yeah, sorry, work was intense, he said, slipping off his shoes and heading into the kitchen. It was like he was on autopilot, going through the motions without realizing that his world was about to come crashing down. I followed him, each step feeling heavier than the last. My hands were shaking, my heart racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let him see me break. Not yet. You work late a lot these days, I said, my tone sharp, each word carrying the weight of my suspicion. He paused, glancing at me with a wary look. It's just a busy season, you know that, he said, trying to brush it off. But I saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the hint of discomfort that told me he knew exactly what I was getting at. Is that so? I replied, crossing my arms, feeling a surge of confidence. Because I happened to find some rather interesting messages on your phone. The color drained from his face, and for a moment he looked like a deer caught in headlights. He stammered, his hands fidgeting as he tried to come up with an excuse, but I wasn't giving him the chance. I saw everything, I said, my voice trembling with the anger I'd been holding back. Every message, every call, every lie. How long were you planning to keep this from me? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that he was cornered, that there was no escaping this. He took a step back, putting distance between us, as if he could somehow escape the truth by moving away. Look, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me, I shouted, the dam finally breaking. I saw the messages, the way you talked to her. You called her babe, you made plans with her, and all this time you looked me in the eyes and lied. He flinched, like my words were physical blows, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal, it all came pouring out, each word cutting through the silence like a knife. I trusted you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? With lies and deception? He tried to reach out, but I stepped back, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, a barrier between us. Please, just let me explain, he pleaded, his voice shaky. But his words felt hollow, meaningless, like the lies he'd been feeding me for who knows how long. Explain? I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. What's there to explain? You cheated on me, you lied to me, you betrayed me in ways I can't even begin to understand. How do you explain that? He looked down, his shoulders slumping, and for a moment, he was silent. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I felt a surge of rage at his words, the anger bubbling up like a volcano ready to erupt. Didn't mean for it to happen, I echoed, my voice dripping with contempt. So what? You just accidentally started an affair? You accidentally told her you loved her? You accidentally betrayed the person who loved you more than anything? He shook his head, his hands trembling as he tried to come up with something, anything that would make this better. But there was nothing. No words, no excuses that could erase the betrayal, that could undo the pain he'd caused. I was lost, he finally said, his voice breaking. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought maybe it was just a phase, something I needed to get out of my system. But I never wanted to hurt you. Get out of your system? I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. You think that makes this okay? You think that erases everything you've done? I shook my head, feeling a wave of sadness wash over me, mingling with the anger. I loved you, I trusted you with my whole heart, and you threw it all away for what? A thrill? A distraction? He looked at me, his eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The man I loved, the man I'd shared my life with, was gone. In his place was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone who'd destroyed everything we'd built together. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. I know that doesn't make it better, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I felt nothing. The love, the trust, the loyalty, it was all gone, replaced by an emptiness that left me feeling hollow. You already did, I said, my voice steady. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible, and there's no going back from that. He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out, but I backed away, keeping the distance between us. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice firm. I can't live like this, pretending that everything is okay, knowing what you've done. I deserve better than that. He opened his mouth to protest, but I shook my head, cutting him off. No, I'm done listening to your lies, your excuses. You made your choice. You chose her over me, and now you have to live with that. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with everything we'd lost, everything that would never be the same. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret, but it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. "I don't know what happens next," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I know that I can't stay here, not with you. Not after everything you've done." He looked down, his shoulders slumping, and for the first time I saw the weight of his actions settle on him. He knew, just as I did, that this was the end, that there was no coming back from this. And as much as it hurt, as much as it tore me apart, I knew it was the right choice. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the silence, surrounded by the wreckage of our life together. And as I stepped outside, feeling the cool night air against my skin, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It was all over. For the first time in months, I felt free. Free from the doubts, the suspicion, the pain that had consumed me. Free to start over, to rebuild my life without him, without the weight of his betrayal dragging me down. And as I walked away, leaving the man I'd once loved behind, I knew that I would never look back. After I walked out, the world around me felt surreal, as if I were watching my life play out from the outside. My heart ached, my chest felt hollow, and yet there was a strange clarity that came with the finality of my decision. I had left behind the man I had loved, the life I thought we had built together, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a part of myself that had been buried beneath his lies. But the relief was short-lived. The truth was that the betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, leaving wounds that would take more than a single decision to heal. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of him, of the life we had shared, of the future we had planned. The quiet moments in my home, once filled with his presence, now felt empty, haunted by the ghost of our relationship. At first, I tried to distract myself, filling my days with tasks that would keep my mind busy. I organized closets, rearranged furniture, anything to keep from dwelling on the memories that lingered in every corner of the house. But the silence was relentless, bringing with it the pain of everything I had lost. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the heartbreak was there, seeping into every part of my life. Nights were the worst. Lying alone in bed, staring at the ceiling, I would find myself replaying every conversation, every look, every touch. I'd think back to the nights we'd spent laughing, holding each other, sharing dreams that now felt like nothing more than empty promises. I wanted to hate him, to erase every memory, but I found myself caught between anger and sorrow, torn by the love that still lingered despite everything he had done. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that I realized I had lost more than just him. I had lost a part of myself. The trust I had once had in him, in love, in myself, had been shattered, leaving me feeling broken and unsure of who I was without him. I had defined myself by our relationship, by the future I thought we would share. And now I was left with nothing but the painful task of rediscovering who I was. In the days that followed, I began to confront the reality of what had happened, allowing myself to feel the full weight of his betrayal. I let myself cry, to feel the anger and sadness that I had tried so hard to suppress. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the pain felt overwhelming, like a wound that would never heal. But I knew that facing it was the only way to begin to heal. Friends reached out, offering words of comfort and support, but I found it hard to open up. How could I explain the depth of my pain, the way his lies had torn apart the very foundation of my life? It felt like a weakness, a failure on my part, and I couldn't bring myself to share that vulnerability with anyone else. Instead, I kept my heartbreak to myself, carrying the burden alone, even though I knew it was slowly breaking me. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to see glimpses of strength within myself, moments where I felt the pain beginning to lessen, just a little. I found myself drawn to things I had once loved but had forgotten in the years of our relationship. I started reading again, losing myself in stories that transported me to other worlds, giving me a brief escape from my own. I went for long walks, letting the fresh air clear my mind, finding solace in the quiet moments of solitude. One afternoon, while cleaning out the remnants of our life together, I stumbled across an old journal I hadn't written in for years. Flipping through the pages, I saw entries from a time before him, when my dreams and ambitions were my own, untainted by the weight of his betrayal. I read about the things I wanted to accomplish, the places I wanted to visit, the person I had hoped to become. It was a reminder of a version of myself I had nearly forgotten, a version that was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. I began to write again, pouring my thoughts and emotions onto the page, allowing myself to express the anger, the sadness, the regret that had been bottled up inside. Each word felt like a release, a step toward healing, a reclaiming of my own voice. It was messy, raw, and painful, but it was real, and it reminded me that I was more than the woman he had betrayed. I was someone with dreams, with a future that didn't have to include him. I delved deeper into this journey of self-discovery. I found myself reevaluating my own role in the relationship. Not to blame myself, but to understand why I had been so willing to overlook the signs, to trust him blindly, even when my instincts told me otherwise. I realized that, in a way, I had been afraid of losing him, afraid of confronting the truth, because I had built so much of my identity around our relationship. I had been willing to sacrifice parts of myself, to ignore my own needs and desires, all in the name of love. That realization was painful, but it was also freeing. I understood now that I had the power to choose a different path, to define myself on my own terms, without the shadow of his betrayal looming over me. I didn't need him, or anyone else, to validate my worth or to give me a sense of purpose. I could create that for myself, rebuild my life from the ground up, stronger and more resilient than before. With each passing day, I began to feel a sense of clarity, a renewed determination to move forward. I stopped looking for answers in the past, stopped replaying the memories that had once haunted me. Instead, I focused on the present, on the small moments of joy and peace that reminded me that I was still capable of happiness. Even after everything I had been through, I started setting goals for myself, small steps that would help me regain a sense of control and purpose. I took up new hobbies, challenged myself to try things I had never done before, to step outside the comfort zone I had built around my relationship. I found strength in those challenges, a reminder that I was capable of growth, of change, of becoming someone stronger, someone who could face life's uncertainties without fear. There were still moments of weakness, times when the pain would resurface, when the memories would come rushing back, bringing with them a wave of sadness. But I had learned to let those moments pass, to acknowledge the pain without letting it consume me. I had accepted that healing was not a straight line, that there would be ups and downs, good days and bad days. But I also knew that each step forward, no matter how small, was a victory, a sign that I was moving closer to the life I wanted to create for myself. Eventually, I found myself able to forgive, not for him, but for me. Holding on to the anger, the resentment, the pain, only kept me tied to a past that no longer served me. Forgiving him didn't mean forgetting what he had done. It meant releasing the hold his betrayal had over my life, allowing myself the freedom to move forward without the weight of his actions dragging me down. And as I let go, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in a long time. It was a quiet strength, a calmness that came from within, reminding me that I was whole, even without him, even with the scars his betrayal had left. I realized that those scars were not marks of weakness, but symbols of my resilience, my ability to survive, to heal, to reclaim my life on my own terms. As I stood at the beginning of this new chapter, I knew that there would still be challenges, moments of doubt, times when the pain would resurface. But I also knew that I was stronger now, more self-aware, more in tune with who I was and what I wanted. I had faced my darkest moments, confronted the truth, and come out the other side with a newfound sense of purpose and clarity. I wasn't defined by his betrayal. I was defined by my ability to heal, to rebuild, to find strength within myself. And as I took those first steps forward, I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that was uniquely mine, a path that I would walk with courage, resilience, and the unshakable belief that I was worth more than the love he had failed to give. As the days turned into weeks, I felt myself beginning to heal, bit by bit. The anger and sadness didn't disappear overnight, and the memories of his betrayal lingered like shadows in the corners of my mind. But I was learning to accept them, to let them exist without letting them control me. It wasn't easy, but each day I felt a little stronger, a little more certain of the path I was creating for myself. There was a day, about a month after I left him, when I realized I had gone an entire morning without thinking about him. I had spent the time focused on myself, on my own plans, my own goals. And in that moment, I felt a rush of relief, a glimpse of the freedom I was beginning to carve out from the pain. It was a small victory, but one that gave me hope. I started to look forward to the future again, to think about the things I wanted for myself, things I had set aside in the years of our relationship. I began setting small goals, steps toward building the life I wanted. I made plans to travel, to visit places I'd dreamed of but had never made time for. I signed up for classes, learning skills I'd always been curious about but had put off, thinking there would always be time later. As I immersed myself in these new experiences, I felt parts of myself coming back to life, parts I had forgotten in the midst of his betrayal. It was as if I were rediscovering who I was, separate from him, separate from the life we'd once shared. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who had faced the darkest moments and come out on the other side, more resilient than before. One day, I decided to take a trip alone, a weekend getaway to a small coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. I needed the time and space to reflect, to fully embrace the changes I was making. Standing on the edge of the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in months. I felt small, yet powerful, as if I were part of something bigger than myself, something that didn't depend on anyone else for validation or worth. During that weekend, I spent hours just walking along the beach, letting my mind wander, letting the thoughts and emotions flow freely. I thought about the relationship, about everything we'd shared, and everything we'd lost. I felt the pain, the betrayal, but also a strange sense of gratitude. As much as his actions had hurt me, they had also given me a gift. The gift of self-discovery, of realizing my own strength and independence. By the end of that trip, I knew that I was ready to let go. It wasn't about forgetting or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about accepting that his betrayal was part of my story, but not the whole story. I was more than the woman he had hurt. I was someone with dreams, with strength, with the courage to create a new life for myself. When I returned home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I threw myself into my work, into my friendships, into the hobbies and passions I had once neglected. I began to see each day as an opportunity, a chance to build something meaningful, something that was mine and mine alone. And in doing so, I found a happiness that was deeper, more fulfilling than anything I had known before. People around me started to notice the change. Friends would comment on how I seemed lighter, more at peace. They told me I looked happier, that there was a glow about me that hadn't been there before. And they were right. I was happier, not because I had forgotten the pain, but because I had learned to live with it, to let it shape me without letting it define me. As time passed, I began to forgive. Not just him, but also myself. I forgave myself for the years I had spent trusting him, for the signs I had missed, for the love I had given so freely. I forgave myself for the pain, for the heartbreak, for the nights I had spent questioning my own worth. I realized that none of it was my fault, that I had loved him with an open heart, and that was something to be proud of. I came to understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing his actions or pretending they hadn't hurt me. It was about freeing myself from the bitterness, the anger, the resentment that had weighed me down for so long. Forgiving him didn't mean I would forget, but it meant that I could move forward without carrying the burden of his choices. I could build a future that was free from the shadows of his betrayal. One evening, as I sat alone with my thoughts, I wrote a letter to myself. It was a promise to live fully, to embrace each day, to love myself with the same openness I had once given to him. I wrote about my dreams, my goals, the life I wanted to create. And as I sealed the letter, I felt a sense of closure, a quiet strength that came from within. I knew then that I was ready to face the world on my own terms, to pursue the life I had always wanted, without hesitation, without fear. I was ready to let go of the past, to close the chapter that had been filled with pain and betrayal, and to open a new one filled with possibility and hope. As I walked out of my home that night, feeling the cool air on my skin, I looked up at the stars and felt a sense of connection, a reminder that I was part of something bigger, something beautiful. I knew that I was still healing, that there would be days when the memories would resurface, when the pain would creep back in. But I also knew that I had the strength to face those moments, to embrace them, and to keep moving forward. In the end, I realized that I hadn't lost anything. I had only gained. I had gained wisdom, resilience, and a deeper understanding of who I was and what I deserved. I had learned to love myself in a way that was fierce, unwavering, and true. And with that love, I knew that I could face whatever the future held, with courage and grace, because I was no longer defined by his betrayal. I was defined by my own strength, by the choices I had made, by the life I was creating. And that life was mine, fully and completely, a testament to the power of healing, of growth, of self-discovery. And as I stood there looking at the world with new eyes, I felt a sense of freedom that I had never known before. A freedom that came from within, a freedom that was unbreakable, a freedom that was mine. With time, I found myself feeling more at peace than I had in years. There was a lightness in my heart, a sense of freedom that I hadn't known was possible. Each day felt like a gift, a fresh start, a chance to build a life that was authentically mine. I had faced my darkest moments, allowed myself to grieve, to feel, and now I was ready to embrace the future with open arms. One day, while sorting through some old things, I came across photos of us together. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, a reminder of the life we'd once shared, of the love I had once believed in so fully. But instead of bitterness or regret, I felt something different, a sense of acceptance, even gratitude. Those memories were a part of my story, but they didn't define me anymore. I had grown, learned, and moved forward, and those experiences were now stepping stones on my journey to self-discovery. I began to see myself through new eyes, not as someone who had been betrayed, but as someone who had faced that betrayal with courage, with resilience. I was proud of the woman I was becoming, someone who could look back on the past with understanding, but who was no longer weighed down by it. The pain was still there, in some small way, but it had softened, transformed into something that no longer hurt, something that reminded me of my strength. With this new sense of clarity, I set new goals for myself, dreams that were purely my own. I began focusing on my career, investing in my own personal growth, exploring hobbies that brought me joy and fulfillment. I even started volunteering, giving back to the community in ways that helped me connect with others, to feel a part of something bigger than myself. Through these new experiences, I discovered a passion for helping others who had been through similar experiences, people who had felt the sting of betrayal, who were struggling to heal and move forward. I joined support groups, spoke with people who had faced their own heartbreaks, shared my journey of healing and resilience. Each conversation felt like a piece of my own healing, a reminder that I wasn't alone in my experiences, that there was a community of people who understood, who had been there, who were finding their own way forward. One afternoon, as I listened to someone share their story of heartbreak, I realized just how far I had come. There was a time when I couldn't speak about my own pain without feeling like it would swallow me whole. But now, I could share my story openly, honestly, without fear. I was no longer a prisoner of my past, no longer bound by the pain of betrayal. I had found my voice, my strength, and it was liberating. In the process of rebuilding, I also learned the importance of boundaries, of protecting my own heart, of valuing myself enough to never settle for less than I deserved. I promised myself that I would only allow people into my life who respected, valued, and loved me for who I was, who saw my worth and cherished it. It was a powerful realization, one that gave me a renewed sense of control over my life, a reminder that I had the right to choose the people I allowed close to me. As I embraced this new chapter, I found myself feeling hopeful about the future, open to the possibilities that lay ahead. I started attending social gatherings, reconnecting with friends, meeting new people, experiencing life in a way that was free, unburdened by the doubts and fears that had once held me back. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive, ready to experience the world with open eyes and an open heart. There was one evening, while having coffee with an old friend, when I realized just how much I had changed. As we talked, laughed, and shared stories, I noticed the ease in my laughter, the lightness in my spirit. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was simply present, enjoying the moment, feeling grateful for the life I was creating. I also discovered a new appreciation for myself, for the qualities that had once felt ordinary, but were now a source of pride. I valued my kindness, my resilience, my ability to forgive and to love deeply. I saw myself as someone strong, someone worthy of happiness and respect, and that realization filled me with a sense of confidence and self-worth that I had never known before. One day, while reflecting on everything I had been through, I decided to write a letter to my past self, to the woman who had loved deeply, who had trusted unconditionally, who had been shattered by betrayal, but had found the strength to rise again. I wrote words of encouragement, words that reminded her of her worth, of her strength, of her ability to heal and rebuild. It was a cathartic experience, a final release of the pain and heartache that had once consumed me. In that letter, I promised her that she would find happiness again, that she would emerge from the darkness stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I told her that she was deserving of a love that was pure, honest, and true, a love that honored her heart and her soul. And as I signed my name at the bottom, I felt a sense of closure, a quiet peace that came from knowing that I had finally let go. In the weeks that followed, I continued to build my new life, to explore new passions, to surround myself with people who lifted me up, who inspired me to be the best version of myself. Each day felt like a new opportunity, a chance to live fully, to embrace the beauty of the present moment. There were still moments of reflection, times when I would think back to the life I had once shared with him. But those memories no longer held power over me. They were simply chapters in a story that had led me to this place, to this version of myself who was unbreakable, who had risen from the ashes of betrayal and heartbreak, who had found strength in her own resilience. I came to understand that life was filled with both joy and sorrow, with love and loss, but that each experience, no matter how painful, was a lesson,